all have a similar experience, but with the caveat that I know some things don't work all the time and there's always ways to make things better. So if something isn't working for you, or if you catch something that doesn't make sense, let me know, okay? Because there is sort of a lot of content in this class, and it's very easy to miss something, particularly as I'm the only eyes on it, and there's something like 900 documents ultimately in the folder for this class on Canvas. So just say I'm not fallible, or I'm not infallible, I'm not perfect. So if you catch anything, just let me know. Hopefully, you all should have access to Canvas by now. I did schedule an announcement to go out yesterday. If you didn't see that, that's fine. Right, it was your day of service, or at least hopefully. But if you haven't had a chance to yet go into Canvas and take a look around, please do that at your earliest convenience. You'll have to do the Start Here module first. That'll kind of give you a rundown, one, of the course. I'm sure there's also a bunch of slides in there you've probably seen way too many times to count. Feel free to go through them, click through as you go through, but at least scan them over, give them a quick read. Covers a lot of things on how to use Canvas, where to find IT, tech, that kind of stuff. It's all there for you. There's a link if you want to schedule an appointment with me in there. You don't have to do that when you see that page, but know that that link will stay there in the Start Here module for the rest of the semester. So if you want to sign up for an appointment to see me, it can be virtual or face-to-face or phone call, whatever. You can do so there. The syllabus is up there, and we will spend a little time today kind of doing a quick overview of it, mostly because my expectations in this class may be drastically different than some you've experienced in other places. And there's a few things I want to highlight to make sure that you are all aware of on day one, so that as we move forward with this class, we're all on the same page. Now, if you have looked at Canvas, it might look like there's a whole lot of stuff and potentially a lot of work there. Yeah, there is with any class, but I've worked to space it out so that it is manageable. And a lot of the things, such as the, you'll see there's exercises each week. You'll get a prompt in here, right? So as long as you watch the lecture, you do the prompt, that gets you those points. Right? So don't feel like you have to turn in something right away because there's something that's listed as due today, okay? Before I get too far, just tell you a little bit about myself. Very briefly, I finished my undergraduate degree back in 2009 from the University of Michigan. It was in physical education. I also had minors in health and history. I was certified to be a physical educator in the state of Michigan, as well as Colorado and a few other states that I applied for. While I was there, I did play rugby, ultimately retired from a knee injury, and now I spend most of my time, free time, what I have, being outdoors as much as possible, hiking, climbing, and biking. I did my my master's degree at Western Michigan University in what at the time was called special physical education. It's now more widely called or recognized as adaptive physical education. Essentially, it's PE specifically designed for kids with disabilities. Right? Honestly, I lucked into doing that type of program. I did it because I thought it would be good to keep my job. Because if any of you remember, 2009, 2008 was when the first lovely recession hit, and teaching jobs were few and far between. Lots of people got pink slips, and so I wanted to make myself the most advantageous and hireable person as possible. But I'm glad I did, because that opened my eyes to the world of working with folks with disabilities, and that ultimately led to doing a PhD at the University of Virginia, which I can tell you, when I was sitting in your place, I had no idea was even a thing you could do with your life, right? I thought if teaching is it, I'm going to be done, I'm out of here. But I decided to go back for more because there were some other things I wanted to do. And the PhD really was, for me, the tool to get to the spaces and open the doors to get into those conversations, right? I don't come from a family of academics, so if any of you have any questions about how to navigate that space, feel free to talk to me whenever you like. I also have a certificate in mixed methods research, which means I do qualitative and quantitative research in the stuff that I do. And I won't bore you with all the details of the stuff I do, but it'll certainly come up as the semester goes along. This was me on the day that I got my fancy doctoral hood, and this was my mentor. He is also the author of your textbook. I don't get any benefit from recommending this book, and he doesn't really either. And the benefit of this book is it's cost-effective for you, and although it says teacher's guide on it, it can be very, very beneficial for anybody going into any service profession that ultimately is going to work with folks with disabilities, right? Which probably all of you, okay? If you're going into athletic training or physical therapy, occupational therapy especially, any of those disciplines, lots of the health disciplines, they all intersect with disability at some point, because as we'll talk about a little bit later, you know, we're all sort of aging into disability, and if we played, what is it, the 6 steps to Kevin Bacon, if we did that with everybody with disability, it wouldn't take 6 steps for you to reach somebody in your life with a disability. Right? For some of you, it might be 0 steps, right? Because you yourself may have one. What else I got? Oh yeah, that's me, fresh-faced when I arrived here in 2017. I'm currently an assistant professor. I'm the head of the Disability Movement Research Collective, which we focus on transformative type of research, really community-based types of things. And I'm the director of the Motor Skills Program, which is your lab. Right? So that, for your record, is not starting today. And when you look on the syllabus, you will see when it starts. It's not for a few weeks. Right? The reason we do that, A, is because I know for at least a large majority of you, you may have never worked with somebody, let alone somebody with a disability, nor have you planned a lesson or designed something along those lines. So these first few weeks are going to help us catch everybody up so that you're ready for that to happen. And then we'll bring kids in from the community. I say kids, but they go anywhere from 3 to up to 30 years of age. We've had join our clinic, and we'll teach them motor skills in small groups. Right? So, and we'll talk about that as the class goes on, and we'll make sure you are very prepared for it. And I know some of you are probably feeling a little anxious at the moment, and that is okay. You are not alone, and you're not the only person to have those anxious thoughts sitting here on day number 1. Right? But the lab portion of this class, I find, is often the most rewarding for everyone, because we take what we learn and talk about and discuss here and actually apply it down in the lab. Right? And some of you, not all of you, but some of you may have epiphanies and be like, I want to do something like this for the rest of my life. Right? That's always a hope too. So I encourage you to go in that with an open mind, and don't be scared to make mistakes. This class is designed for that to happen. I expect you to make mistakes, okay? And that might not be easy for many of you to hear, okay? But mistakes is where we often learn the best. Okay? So I try to provide as much grace for that to happen in this class as possible, okay? Because I would rather grade you and assess you on work that you've had time to dedicate to than just something you rush and turn in as a deadline. Okay? So you'll be well prepared. My whole purpose is to make sure all 70-something of you, I know we're not all in here today, but 70-something of you in this class get through successfully, okay? And whatever that means for you. All right. This is Artemis. This was back when she was 12 weeks, so she was so cute. She's much larger and much bigger than that now. She's about 10 months now, but she is my emotional support animal, my wife's emotional support animal. And you may see her in and around the building on occasion if you haven't already. She will occasionally join us in lab too. So that's her. Just know you may see her at some point during the year. Aggressively friendly. Just a little bit of buzz. I'm not going to force you to watch it because I want to make sure that YouTube gets all the watches it can. Boost the algorithm. But I did give a TED Talk last year around September on the work that I do, and you can get it at that link down there, and I can share that through an announcement as well, or you can search my name in YouTube and find it. I think it's good. Then again, I gave it. But it does touch on some of the stuff that we will touch on in this class too. Right? So if you're up for it, feel free. You can go and watch that too. All right. Let's chat about the course. I forgot to bring up Canvas. Is there anybody in here who has not had the opportunity to go on Canvas yet? Okay, good. So you all should at least know somewhat of what I'm talking about. At least log in. Okay. So, well, I guess I'll put on your view for a second, right? No, do not want to start that. Okay. So when you log into our class, this should be what you see or something along these lines, right? You will see all of these to-dos, right? It seems very, seems like a lot, but these things right here, this in-class lecture, those things are stuff you do in here. Right? So as long as you're following along, you're staying up with the course, you'll be just fine. Okay? Other things like quizzes, those are within the module. You have 2 opportunities to take quizzes. They cover stuff that is in the module content as well as things we'll talk about in class. So you don't have to take them when it says to take them, right? You can wait until you come to class. You can do it later in the week. Do it the week after. It does not matter to me as long as they are done before the end of the semester. Right? And that goes for just about every other assignment in this class. As you look through the syllabus and as you look at all the dates on Canvas, there are due dates. Okay. The reason those due dates are there are, 1, to keep you on track. Okay? Like I said, there's a lot of stuff to go through in this class. I could teach multiple semesters with all the stuff that we don't get to cover here. It's really a skimming of the surface in terms of disability. I recognize you are all growing, burgeoning adults, and you have more on your schedule than just my class. Right? I know for a fact you are. Most of you, at least, are taking at least more than this class, right? Potentially even 3 or 4 others. Some of you probably have jobs. Some of you may have athletic commitments. Some of you may have family commitments, right? You have to balance all of those things, including turning things on time. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I would rather grade assignments that you have spent time on and feel good about than something you just turn in at a deadline, all right? So that means if something is due tonight at midnight and you know you're not going to get to it, that you're going to do better if you spend time on it the next day or even the day after, because that's when you're not time off of work or you have a break in your schedule, you can turn it in then. Okay? The due dates are when I can give you the best feedback. Right? So if you turn it in by the deadline and there's something that faults my feedback, I've built it into my schedule to make sure I can get that feedback. But for instance, if you turn something in the next week or 2 weeks later, I might not have as much time in my schedule to provide that feedback. You'll still get a grade, you won't be penalized, but you won't get my level of scrutiny, if that makes sense. I'm more than happy to talk with you about it afterwards. Starting next Monday, I'll have student drop-in hours from 2 to 4 p.m. at the Starbucks in the cafe, Starbucks in the Union. If it's nice outside, I'll probably be sitting outside. Right? Come and find me. You can drop in. You don't have to make an appointment for that at all. Right? You can talk about questions, ask follow-ups, anything you'd like. Right? When you get in here, okay, there's my announcement up at the top if you haven't seen it. Okay? You'll have the syllabus here, which gives you sort of an overview of the whole semester, right? You can see all the assignments and when they're due. There's also a spot for you to download the syllabus in a PDF if you'd like. But where you're going to find just about everything is here in the in the module section, right? And you can I'm not going to do all of these, but you can see there's module content for every week of this semester. And this class is a hybrid, so an hour is spent in class, and there's about an hour or so, some weeks it's a little more, some weeks it's a little less, of content on Canvas to supplement that. Right? Again, I can't cover every single thing. So there might be a lot of rote information, just things to kind of go through, characteristics, generalities, that sort of stuff. In class, we're going to really focus on the applied aspect of those pieces. Okay? But before you get access to any of that, you've got to start with the Start Here module. Okay? And because inevitably somebody misses this, as you'll see, right, you have to go through all of these. Okay? I make that so for this module only to make sure that there are no excuses that you've missed anything. Okay? So in order for all of these to have a check, you have to go through every single page. Okay? And again, some of them, like netiquette and getting health and technical, those types of things, you've probably seen them, so you can probably jump through them quite quickly. Okay? Things like objectives, some of the policies, the syllabus down here, those you might spend a little bit more time taking a look at, because everybody needs to contribute to the Q&A forum to get a check for that. Okay? So the Q&A forum is something that will exist in Canvas for the entirety of the semester. If you ask a question there, I or a TA or somebody else in class hopefully has an answer. Right? That might be something that isn't specific to you, that you don't need to ask me directly. It's just sort of a broad question for class. You might try there first. Right? Just because somebody else might know the answer, and it might benefit others to know that answer too. Right? Within each module, you'll also see there's a live stream link. So I live stream classes every week. That way, if for whatever reason you cannot be here in person, you can watch live during the time of class. You can also watch the replay of that too. Okay? Slides will be in there as well for you to have access to. Any assignments or additional readings, those will be up there as well. Okay? The only book that's assigned is this one. And again, you can find it cheaply. You can find it at places that isn't our bookstore for less than what they charge. But don't tell them I told you that. It's not supposed to. But you can find them. Anything else that I assigned for you to read will be here, okay, in the modules. So you can download that content. There's also sometimes a podcast, a short podcast or something to listen to in lieu of reading, right, that covers some of the concepts we'll talk about in class as well. Okay. Any questions on that stuff so far? Okay. Let me switch out of student view. Oh, once you do the Start Here module, you'll notice that all the other modules will open up for you, okay? Meaning you could go through this course at your own, but please don't get too far ahead of me. Okay? There may be some things that I need to explain in detail, but if you're the type of person that likes to see ahead, it's there for you as well, okay? A little bit. Is that good for you in the back? Good enough? Okay. So, her title, schedules, here's my contact information. Right, that's the best email to get to me. Try to limit messaging me directly through Canvas, mostly because I don't get those notifications all the time. Right? If I turn on notifications for Canvas, my phone literally never stops. Right? So if you want to get to me directly and quickly, send a direct email. Okay? I'll check Canvas occasionally when I'm in there, but again, it's a couple of times throughout the week as I'm working on class. I check my email much more frequently than that. Okay? Office hours, information, here's the link if you want to schedule a meeting with me. I'm on campus Mondays and Tuesdays, pretty much all the time. So if you want an in-person meeting, try to schedule it for one of those 2 days. Wednesday, I think I have Thursdays open too, for remote conversations. So we can meet over Zoom or Meet or phone call or whatever other million video conferencing apps that we have now. Whatever's easiest for you. Our TA, Rosa, she will be sending a message to you all in Canvas, so be on the lookout for that. She probably won't join us in class, but you'll see her in the labs once those start up. You'll also see her name going through on the grades and stuff like that, so if you see that name pop up, that's who she is, okay? Course descriptions there for you to read. Here's just a little bit more information sort of about all the different assignments that we do have. There's a short video introduction just to get to know everybody in class. That's not due until, not this Friday, but the following Friday, so you've got a little bit of time to do that. There are module quizzes within each of the content modules. Your lowest 3 will drop. Okay? So you get 2 chances on each of those quizzes. So if you don't like your score the first time, you can retake it. If you have any questions on anything, let me know. They just need to be done by May 5th. Okay? Yes? You can't? Okay. Not available to download? Okay. I will figure out why that is. Okay. That's the first I've heard of that before, but let me check on it. We'll see. If you get to this page that I'm on here in the module, is there not a spot that says download?
Yeah, it's up at the top. It's up at the very top, underneath the title. Right
title.
You just click that little link right there that you're.
Oh, this one right there. And it says download. Thank you. So if you do it within the module, that might work for you because I just downloaded this here, and this is just some random computer I'm signed onto. Right? So if you're in the Start Here module and you go down to the really funky name with PDF on it, that's where you should be able to download it, but you might have to go through everything, so it's got a green check before you can do that. Okay, engagement, those are what you will do in class, right? So there's a few times throughout the class period. Sometimes it's once, sometimes it's twice. It can be at random spots. I'll ask you for a response. You'll do a quick response on your phone, and that's how we'll get engagement for the class. Lesson plans. You will develop 2 lesson plans as a part of the lab, meaning you will teach twice. There'll be 10-minute teaching demonstrations, 10 or 15 minutes, and you'll have a small group of your peers to help support you. Okay? With COVID, doing the lab was a bit of a struggle to try to figure out the best way to keep everybody safe, mostly because a lot of the kids that we have come here have quite complex medical needs, and some can get ill quite quickly or easily, and they can be very susceptible. So how we've done it to keep everyone safe, we haven't had issues yet in the last 4 semesters, is that we will split all of you up into 3 different groups. Okay? So once our labs start, there will be 3 lab sessions that you are required to attend through the semester. Okay? And you will know which ones those are. If you cannot attend a specific lab for whatever reason, right, you get sick, something happens, we can move you to another lab day. Right? So you can make that up in another opportunity. Your lesson plans are worth 20 points each. I should say 20 points each, that's my mistake on there. 8 points is actually teaching your lesson plan. All right, so if you turn in a lesson plan but don't actually teach it, the best you can get is a 12 out of 20. Yes, ma'am. Today, I will show you in a second, not today. The only thing, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we get closer to them, but your lesson plans, a draft of it will be due before you teach. All right, so for instance, if you were teaching today, I would ask that you turn in a draft of your lesson plan before class today. That way, I and Rosa would know you've at least thought of what to do. That you're not just showing it up and winging it, because that rarely, if ever, works. Right? So the idea is that we have some kind of plan. We will go through those lesson plans and grade them. If you are not happy with your grade on one or both of your lesson plans, you can correct them and resubmit them. Right? That is the point of this class, where I'm hoping to get your best work. Okay? If you submit a draft and you're happy with the grade you get, you don't have to resubmit it. That's totally up to you. Okay? But that opportunity is there for you. We will also do an assessment in here. Again, we'll talk about it. We'll go over it. We'll talk about how it's going to be done. But the first lab session that you have will be an assessment. You'll assess one or more kids. You'll get a feel of how that goes, and you can use that to start your lesson plan and kind of think about what stuff to do. All right? Yes, sir.
Can I go back to what you said about the lab? You're going to split the lab up. So the lab time is what is scheduled for like 5 to 6:30 or whatever that time is.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that like there's going to be 3 different groups, meaning
You have to come 3 times.
Okay.
So I'll show you. Once
Okay,
we grant the tentative schedule, it's a little easier. It's hard to talk in abstract. The other piece in this class that is going to be different than potentially some of the others that you've done is what is called an uneset. Right? You're probably all very familiar with essays, right, where you write about a topic, certain length, X, Y, Z, all those things. The unessay could be that, right? You could do that if you choose to, but it could also be just about anything else you want to do. Right? People have done children's books, they've done podcasts, they've made art. Right? You have a choice to do whatever it is that you want for that assignment, right? In whatever format that you want. The only thing is it has to be compelling and effective. Right? So whatever you do, you can't just wing it and say, I'm just going to write this thing, and that's probably not going to get a really good grade. But if you, for example, say, I want to write about a poem that relates to disability and movement somehow, and that ends up being a haiku, okay? You all know what haikus are? All right, 3 lines of text, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. That could be your unessay. But that's got to be a really thought out and well composed haiku. All right? Does that make sense? And we will talk more and more as the semester goes through about this. And I've built in this semester a day in which we'll actually work in class on our ideas, get feedback from peers. I can be here to give you feedback, that kind of stuff. So we'll work it in. My goal is that whatever you choose to do, okay, is something that you are engaged with and you're passionate about in completing for the semester. Right? And whatever it is, we can try to find a work plan to make sure that you are successful in that. Right? Some of your peers in the past have written letters to politicians about accessibility things. Right? One person wrote the narrative of a grant that they wanted to propose or to submit in the following year. Right? So there's lots of different potential things that you could do. Right? If you're somebody who likes to paint or draw or sew, right? There are many things you could do. If you have an engineering mind, right? You could prototype some things, right? You can work in groups for this project, but if you do work with others, right? I expect that work product to reflect the work of however many people are involved, right? If you are one person doing a podcast, it's a whole lot different than 5 people doing a podcast, right? What I expect from 5 people is a whole lot different than what I expect from one person, right? In terms of that effectiveness. Yeah. You'll see there's a couple of assignments in there. The first 2, the idea and the check-in, are to get you thinking about this, right? Because although May seems like a far distance away at the moment, it will come up on us very, very, very quickly, okay? And I don't want you all waiting until after spring break to even consider what you're going to do, because for some of you, your project might be something that you actually need to invest time over the next 3 to 4 months to do whatever that might be, right? One person wanted to do basically a survey of the accessibility on UNT's campus, but they waited too long and they realized they ultimately couldn't get it done in time, so they had to switch their project kind of late and added extra work for them. Right? So as you think through, right? Obviously, it doesn't have to be today, it doesn't have to be later this week, but at some point as you start to kind of compile your thoughts for this class, and just kind of take a few moments and think about what are some things you might want to do. Okay? All right. Here's some FAQs for you just on different stuff that comes up. You are free to read those at your leisure. One point that I will, I hate when it does that, sorry. Okay. Emails or responses, if you message me the night before something is due, you're not going to get a response, okay? At least until the next morning. Email me over the weekend, I'm probably not going to message you until Monday, okay? I do try to separate my life as much as possible, okay? And I can't be on call 24/7, but I will respond at my earliest convenience. Also know that there is nothing in this class that is that life or death that you need a response at 11 p.m. at night, okay? And I know some of you will panic because that's the way we've set up our systems for you. You want to panic because something came up and you're right at a deadline and you need to submit it, but no, you have time. There is no immediacy in this class, okay? Other than when we have to come and teach, then you actually have to do something because we're working with kids and clients. All right, all those things. There we go. Oh, Jesus. Stop using that button. There we go. All right, so at the end of the very long syllabus, you will find a sort of brief, tentative outline of the things we're going to cover in this class. There are assignments on there, so you can see how those assignments spread out over the weeks. And in this last tab is where all the lab stuff is. Okay, so as you notice, we don't have any lab until the 14th of February. Okay, so these first 4 weeks, all we have is class here, and then we're done. Okay. Once we get to the 14th, you'll notice on there, okay, there's group 1, group 2, group 3. We'll split the class evenly among those groups. So if you're in group 1, right, you come on the first day. When we get down after spring break to when we start teaching, so group 1 teaches, group 2, group 3. So we just go through on a rotation like that. Okay. Again, if ultimately you're assigned into a group and you miss one of these days or more of these days, whatever, let me know. As soon as you know you're going to miss it, right? But as soon after you miss it as possible, so that we can make sure you can make it up on another day. Okay. Any questions on those pieces? Okay. In this first one, this is where we're going to do the assessment, so the CGMB assessment. That's when you will do it. Okay. So if you're in group 1, okay, you'll do the assessment first. Same kids are going to come back over and they're going to get to do the assessment again and again with different groups of you. Before spring break, we will have a lab session, but I will be teaching you. Okay? So we'll go out, I'll give some demonstrations of different games, different ways to kind of how we should set up our lesson plans. That way, not only do you get to see the paper version, but you actually get to see what it might look like taught. Okay? This day will likely be shorter. Okay, so it's the day before spring break. I know many of you will be excited to go, although it's the Tuesday before, so there's plenty of time. But we'll come in here, we'll do some work as groups in terms of our unessays, and then after about an hour, we'll go down into the gym, and I'll keep you there not until 6:30, I'll promise that. Sounds good for some.
The additional materials that's on there, is that stuff that we need to like have taken care of before we come to class, or is that just in conjunction with the course material we're going?
Oh, no. This is in conjunction as the course is going along. So for instance, as you'll see today, right, obviously, most likely you probably all didn't go through this at the moment, but it is there for you afterwards in the module. So if you have an opportunity to read it, it will help kind of situate some of the things we talk about in class, but it's also there as supplemental material as well to help continue to reinforce those things. And as you'll notice, right, there's sort of several different listening opportunities built in, where there's a podcast that no more than 40 minutes or so talks about different elements for that particular topic. And those, again, they're embedded in there, so when you click it, it'll take you to it. You can listen on your phone, or you can listen on your computer, wherever you're at. Any other questions on syllabus, due dates, assignments? Yes, sir.
So it looks like you have for like the whole week, so for Tuesday and Thursday will be starting both.
There's no Thursdays. There's only Tuesdays. Yep. So this class is technically a hybrid, which means half of our course content lives online, the other half we get here in class, right? Which is why it's only an hour and 20-minute class and there's no Thursday sessions. Does that make sense? So the expectation is that you are going through the content online, because that's why we don't have 3 hours in person. Okay. Does that make sense? You can show up Thursdays, I won't be there. Anything else? Okay. This, maybe. Spinning wheel of death. There we go. Memory saver. Does everybody have a restful break? Kind of? No. That's okay. Hopefully you find some time for yourself now. All right, we talked about that. Now we are going to get into talking about the fun stuff. I've got 40 minutes to see what I can get through. So, there we go. As we go through this course, my goal is to challenge some of the beliefs that you may have, may not recognize that you have, regarding disability, particularly in movement contexts. Because for many of you, particularly those of you in kinesiology, this may be your only class that focuses on disability. A part of this class will be dedicated to going over different disability types, commonalities in terms of characteristics, symptomology, that kind of stuff. But we will also talk about what that means in a broader context within movement as well as within society. Because disability is not just something that you are diagnosed with. It can be a political class, or actually it is a political class, right? Any of you who have signed up for a job, there's a volunteer form asking if you want to disclose a disability, right? Some of you in classes, or some of you in terms of your school, may have needed to use the Office of Disability Services because you may need an accommodation. Right? And we will talk about how some of those things in society we do okay with, and how a lot of them our society in many ways acts in a disabling fashion, right? In which individual impairments are not the primary reason an individual cannot access certain aspects of society or play a certain sport, but potentially the attitudes, beliefs, policies, etc., that are built around that institution. Okay? So I do hope to challenge you a little bit regarding that. Well, actually a lot of it, and push you as much as I can. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what ableism is. And some of you may have heard that term, you may have come across it in reading, but we're going to focus on it, we're going to actually spell it out. We'll talk about different models of disability, particularly the social model, contributions of language, what the empire of the normal is. We'll talk about inspiration porn, and as well as who is included and who decides who is included, okay? If we get to it. I don't know if I'll get to all of this today. So to start, why might this be important, right? All of you are here, I hope, because you do see this particular area as important. Some of you maybe got a recommendation that I'm a favorable professor to take. That's okay too. You're here, so I'm going to challenge your beliefs on this anyway. For all of you, okay, and again, no matter what profession you are going into, you will come in contact with somebody with a disability at least once at some point in your career. Okay? I don't care if you are working with pediatric patients, you're working with geriatric individuals, or you're working with professional athletes, you are going to encounter somebody with a disability at some point. 26%, according to the CDC, of adults in the US qualify as having some form of disability. They do include individuals with minor vision impairments who are corrected by glasses, right? And so we have a few glass wearers in the class, and I'm sure that many of you probably don't consider yourself disabled if that is your only impairment, but that qualifies as a disability, right? And that again highlights the difference between disability as a political class and as a social class, right? As an identity that one takes on because it discusses their particular experiences with society and in their life. When we look at that, a little more granularly, we can see that there are a fair amount of individuals that would have what we call mobility impairments, right? They may have issues walking, they may use mobility aids, difficulty walking stairs, and if you think about our society, how it's set up, right? We often have a lot of physical barriers to many of the spaces that we inhabit, including physical space where we would do things like sport or other physical activities, right? Where there may be actual physical issues to participate, to even accessing that sport, let alone participating. We have a fair amount that have concentration or cognition impairments, and this could be things that are related to what we might consider as intelligence, but it can also be related to things like executive function. Okay? So those of you who might be like me and have ADHD, executive function tends to be quite difficult. Okay? So I've built in many different coping mechanisms and strategies to try to help structure my day so that I'm not overwhelmed and all over the place all the time. Many individuals might have difficulty independently living, right? Meaning they might have issues. Yes, you may, go ahead. Might have difficulty with independent living, right? Meaning they might not be able to fully take care of themselves, right? They might have difficulties making food or getting themselves dressed or through their morning routine. I had a cousin who had difficulty with money. He was otherwise independent, right? He lived in his own house, took care of everything, got himself to and from work, but he could not balance a checkbook, right? And most of us in this room might be saying, well, yeah, I struggle with that too, right? Money is a very abstract construct, right? And then when you layer on top of it potentially a cognitive impairment or an intellectual disability, there adds other layers of difficulty there too. And you'll see we have hearing, vision, and again, there's some self-care down there too. The other important aspect is all of us are aging into disability, okay? Roughly 50 or so percent, 1 in 2, of those above the age of 70 have a disability, right? Again, they may not identify as disabled, but they may have a mobility impairment, they may have hearing impairments, visual impairments, you name it. And if any of you are privileged to have elders in your life at or around that age, right, you might notice some of these things. Okay? You might notice your grandfather or grandmother struggle to hear you, so you got to speak a little bit louder, right? They might get the magnifying glass out. Their text messages might blow up the whole screen, right? All of these things exist, and we are all aging toward it, right? Too often, however, because disability is seen as taboo in our broader society, we don't talk about these things until it is a part of your life. We don't talk about what it's like to have a spinal cord injury until somebody has one in your immediate orbit. You don't know what it's like for somebody with a vision impairment until you yourself lose your vision. Okay? Too often we sort of push these conversations off to the side. We don't have them. There are a number of reasons for this, which we'll get to in a little bit. But a lot of it is framed just in how we look, how we define what disability is and isn't. Okay? So what I want you to do now, and you don't have to write this down, you don't have to put it anywhere, but just take 30 seconds in your mind. How would you finish this? Right? Disability is what? Okay. Anybody want to finish it? Yeah.
Mental, emotional, or the ability to something or something at 100% efficiency, meeting the expectation of a society.
Okay, I'm going to paraphrase that a little bit. No, you're okay. So yeah, mental, physical, cognitive, emotional, basically not being able to do whatever it is at 100% of societal expectations. Like kind of the gist? Yeah. Okay. Hold up. Okay. Anybody have anything else? Anybody have a word in how they might define disability? Yeah?
It's a label.
A label? Okay. Yeah. What else? Yeah. A barrier. Okay. What else? Yeah. Could be a mindset, perhaps. Yeah. Different. Okay. I'm sure many of you have heard differently abled, those kinds of extra terms. Anybody have anything positive?
Sometimes disabilities, other people may be affected.
Yeah. So there may be some advantage with some disability, right? It's not all negative. I'll tell you again, as somebody with ADHD, if there's something that has my interest, I can hyper focus on that thing in perpetuity, right? As long as it engages. Yeah.
So they could give you a different outlook.
Different outlook, right? Certainly. Well, I'm going to give you some standard language, right? This is from the World Health Organization. Disability is an umbrella term for impairments, activity limitations, or participation restrictions. It denotes the negative aspects, interactions between a person's health, and those other contextual factors, right? Such as your environment, personal factors like how much money you might have, etc. Okay? From the Americans with Disabilities Act, which we'll talk a little bit more in next module in the next class, they define disability as with respect to an individual that might have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major activities. There has to be a record, and according to law, right, they actually have to believe that that is a disability category or an actual disability diagnosis, right? It has to fit within their own categorization. Disability is that, right? Disability is and is often used to talk about impairments. But as I'm talking about disability, I'm not necessarily just inferring someone's impairments. Someone could have an impairment, but they may not feel disabled. Again, I'll take glasses because they're a pretty easy example. Those of you who have corrective lenses that allow you to see at what we would consider normal, right, 20/20 or close to it, you probably don't feel disabled, at least when you're wearing your glasses. But on the days when it's foggy out, had to wear masks, lost your glasses, you broke them, dropped the contact, come pretty quick, right? How that impairment can become disabling because the rest of society does not allow for accommodations, right? Texts are often very small, so unless you have those corrective lenses, you can't read them. Okay? And examples go on and on and on. This is mostly because hit too many buttons. Nope, go back. There we go. For most of you, disability is taught and we're often thought about in terms of what is considered the medical model of disability, which suggests that the impairments or chronic illnesses, right, that they are the real difficulties and therefore they must be fixed or corrected. For practically every disability category that we talk about in class this semester, there are no cures. There are no fixes. The person has such a disability for their lifetime. Somebody with ADHD, there's no way to cure ADHD. Something I have and will have throughout the rest of my life. I also have depression, chronically, right? Which is something I did not know and recognize until I was in my 30s. That has been with me and it will continue to be with me. Some days are easier, some days are harder. Therapy helps. Having a good partner and spouse and support network also helps, right? But that is a part that is with me all the time. And some of you may have similar experiences. You may have other types of disabilities. They become a part of your lived experience. And we can't just fix them. We can't erase them. This is really good when we aren't talking about disease, right? Disease can be fixed, right? By all means, I want to get rid of cancer just like everybody else, right? Those can be fixed. However, if somebody experiences or has to deal with cancer, they are often left with other impairments because of that, right? Those impairments, even though cancer itself is not a disability, cancer itself can cause situations where an individual may experience disability, right? And the way we look at that is through the social model of disability. Okay? And there are many different versions and models in terms of disability. Social model of disability isn't even looked on as the most perfect one now. There's others, a couple others that we might talk about this semester. But the difference between the medical and social model is instead of looking at the individual and saying, you need to be fixed, it goes, well, society needs to be fixed. Because it is not the individual impairment that causes the disabling condition, but society's inability to accommodate that. Right? So for instance, we may have inaccessible buildings. Right? If any of you have ever been in a wheelchair or ever had to use the automatic door coming from Chestnut on this side of the building, 75% of the time it doesn't work, right? That's a huge barrier. Not the fact that somebody may use arm crutches or other mobility aids, but the fact that when they go to use the accommodating factor, it doesn't work. Right? Just this last year, we finally put in, on both sides, I believe, men and women's restrooms, accessible bathrooms. At least one stall in each of them. Why they didn't do all of them, that position was far above my pay grade. But even in that situation, right? Yes, there is an accommodated a stall that can accommodate a wheelchair user, but what happens if two wheelchair users go in there at the same time? Or somebody happens to like the extra space in the accessible stall, so they go in that one, which leaves, at least on the men's side, I don't know what the women's side looks like, two stalls that they can't fit into. Right? You got to wait for that one person while other stalls sit empty and people can go in and out. So it's those little things. It's often the little things that we overlook that, in my view, are more disabling than the impairments themselves. We can talk about attitudes, right? And we will in a second, but we know attitudes have a major role in how somebody experiences different things in society. How organizations construct themselves, or the procedures they have, or the policies they have, can be disabling. The fact that a university has to have an Office of Disability Services means that the university did not establish accessibility as a baseline. Right? That we are saying classes are inaccessible, so we have this office for those students to get the accommodations they may need. That adds an extra step for those students, right? And those accommodations could always be rebuffed, cause even further issues, right? Doing simple things in terms of accommodations can be beneficial, which is why, although I know I've received some letters, if you ever need an accommodation for anything in this class, all you need to do is ask, right? I do try to provide things as widely as accessible as possible, but I'm not always perfect, right? Now, the reason this is important, just one of them, but when Dixon and their co-authors looked at a study, they looked at perceptions of people in interacting with someone who they could identify as disabled, right? Reminder that you cannot always visibly acknowledge somebody has or does not have a disability, right? If I had not self-disclosed, you could go through this whole semester not knowing that I had a disability, right? But for 2 of 3 people, right, 66 point on to infinity% of people would actively avoid somebody with a disability, not because of any inherent prejudice that they acknowledge, but because they had a fear of doing or saying the wrong thing, right? So it's not even that you just don't want to do something wrong. And I'm sure there are some of you in here that may have felt similarly, or do feel similarly. There may have been times where you have not interacted, or you were awkward around somebody because you didn't want to do the wrong thing, right? That can lead often to things that are worse, right? Because that can lead to exclusion, ultimately, and potentially some discrimination, even if it is not intentional. Right? In that same study, they found that 1 in 3 disabled people would actively hide their disability if they could. Right? So for myself, I can tell you there are certain places where I go that I don't openly acknowledge the fact that I have a disability, simply because I know that will change the perceptions that somebody may have in a certain space. Now, thankfully, I have many other privileges that are afforded to me, and often if I feel like I need to, I'll make sure to drop that, no, it's doctor, thank you, and use that to counteract certain things. But for many individuals, particularly those with more severe disabilities, they may not have the extra privileges in order to sort of compensate for that. I'm not going to spend, again, too much time on this, but just to frame our thoughts so we're all in the same place. A lot of this is based in stigma, right? Stigma meaning that there is something that we as a society, there's some belief that leads us to reject or avoid certain people that might fall into a certain category, right? Okay, we're talking about disability here, but you can also talk about race, or gender, any of the other things that might fall in here. Not to equate experiences of ableism, right, discrimination against disabled folks, or racism, not to equate those two things, but they happen in a very similar way. And often, those who come from marginalized groups, or multiply marginalized groups, will experience the intersection of those oppressions. Stigma, which back in the Greek time actually was a physical marking, right? Now it is something that is not physical, but still exists and is still quite as potent. It is often rooted in stereotypes. Now, stereotypes in and of themselves are not negative all the time. They're not inherently bad. Some stereotypes are rooted in some element of truth, right? They might be an over-exaggeration or overgeneralization, right? As somebody who has blonde hair, I've heard my fair share of blonde jokes in my life, right? All of that, blonde jokes and anything else we might fall into that category, is a stereotype. Again, telling a blonde joke does not lead to ultimately discrimination against blonde people, but in and of itself does live in a space where it could, it does, but it could lead to prejudice. Right? If you believe in a stereotype that is rooted in maybe a little fact, but a little bit too broad, right? That can lead ultimately to a prejudice where you do have a negative belief against a group for some reason. Right? That leads ultimately to discrimination where we are acting out that prejudice. Right? So prejudice is the beliefs, discrimination is the actions. And so when we put this all into this model by Brondani and their colleagues, right, stigma sits at the center and it intersects with the idea of discrimination, stereotypes, labels, exclusion, but that all sits within the idea of power. Right? And this conversation has come up in recent years, particularly around race and gender, but for those with disabilities, right, which is often recognized as one of the largest minority groups because it does not discriminate by race or gender or orientation or social status or any of those other aspects. Disability uniformly impacts society. But when we look at power in terms of how all of this works, those who sit in positions of power, i.e., the organizers of the Paralympic Games, very often is not somebody who is disabled. Right? The decisions made for and about disabled people are often from non-disabled individuals. So that idea of shifting power means that those people in those positions should be representative of the group they're working with. Okay. And this leads me to ableism. Right? And ableism, in a very short definition, is the discrimination of disabled people in favor of able-bodied individuals, right? Or non-disabled persons. To give you a longer definition from T.L. Lewis, who is an abolitionist lawyer, they situate ableism within anti-blackness, within colonialism, within capitalism. Oftentimes when we think about the idea of disability, we look at it in terms of what we can produce, what we can make, how we can perform, what our ability is, right? In sport, that might mean those who can perform at the highest level, i.e. our professionals, they carry a lot of the power in those situations. They build up a lot of capital in terms of what they're able to do or not do. For those with disabilities, when you compare disabled athletes, even if they are aspiring to similar levels of competition, will always be viewed as less than because they are disabled compared to their able-bodied counterparts. So, set of beliefs rests on the assumption often that disabled people need to be fixed, and it is deeply, deeply integrated into our society, particularly any society that comes from Euro-Western centric beliefs that is heavily invested into capitalist forms of production. And this is not meant to push you in any political way, but to identify how disability sits perhaps differently than some other categories that we might identify. Sometimes there is this social identity of disability, there's this medical form, as well as a political identity. Right? Mia Mingus, who is a wonderful disability justice advocate, wrote in 2018 that it should not be that we have to leave mainstream disability spaces to be able to be our full selves and have full conversations about our own lives. It shouldn't be that we have to leave racial justice and people of color spaces to be able to fully name and examine how able supremacy and white supremacy work hand in hand to oppress and target disabled people of color and all people of color at large. And it shouldn't be that we have to leave queer and feminist spaces, talk about gender oppression and ableism. When we read this quote, right, any type of ism, right, that you face, they all, again, act similarly, but they are all interconnected, ultimately. And again, not to equate one to another, but all types of oppression are built and maintain every other form. So when we have racism that exists, sexism will exist. When we have those, ableism will exist. And even within spaces that might be working to correct one or more of those aspects in our society, fortunately, ableism often still persists, even in groups that are the most well-intentioned. How many of you have gone to a protest rally at some point? A couple of you, right? Did that protest rally have a sign language interpreter? Okay, one. Great. That's a good one, right? Most do not. So if you are somebody who would benefit from that accommodation, you would not be able to access that place of protest, which is seeking, right, equality, although it still lingers, still struggles in other aspects. Right? So this is just to say that as we talk about these things, and in this class, we will focus on disability and ableism and how that interacts with how you might work with somebody in your future profession. But know these other things are also there and they are interconnected as well. Okay, so when we look at this in terms of, this is back 2020, so these are a little dated, right? But even as we were thinking about things in terms of public health initiatives regarding the COVID outbreak, back in 2020, when we started talking about essential, often people were just using that word to excuse disabled folks. When people who have chronic illnesses say, well, I'd prefer when people mask because it keeps me safer and I can engage in society. And the rest of society says, well, you're vulnerable, just stay home, we're fine after your party. Okay. That's discriminating and excusing one group of people for the benefit of the others. So know that even as you work through, particularly because your area of study, for most of you, I know not all of you are kinesiology students, but for many of you, since you are working with health, body, well-being, even if you don't focus on disability, these aspects will play a role in some way. Okay? And for many of you, after taking this one course, you will likely have more knowledge about disability and about these issues than your peers, and sometimes even your superiors, depending on what job you are in. Right? Not to say that you all need to go out and become radical activists regarding all of these aspects, but because you have some knowledge, the hope is that you can make small changes in your own spaces, at least regarding to ableism and access for disabled people. Right? And how do we do that? How do we counter it? Well, two pretty simple ways, right? Although enacting them is often very much harder. First, we have to recognize that stigma and misconception about disability. The fact that when I asked you all to define disability, not one of you said they are competent. Right? That would, some of you maybe had that first thought, but for most of you, your first thought was not disability equals competence. Right? That is because you have been inundated through your life with the stigma that disability does not equal worthy, or does not equal able, right? So it's recognizing that first bit and recognizing how that ultimately impacts us so that then, okay, we can work to engage folks in change those views and differences, right? When somebody says some random stereotype that you know to be false about disability, you can step in and say, well, that's not the case, right? Or somebody uses certain forms of language, which we'll talk about just here, you can correct them. right? Or you can help them. You don't have to be the person that just goes out and corrects everybody all the time, right? Where is it? There we go. So I'd like you to very quickly, kind of quickly, okay, answer these 3 questions. So look out your phone, use the QR code, or the link is down here as well. Again, you can also access this afterwards if your phone died or your computer's dead. I believe I also made it super large up, so you can access it. Everybody got that? All good? Anybody still need the big one? Take silence as we're good. Okay. Tell me just in a sentence or so, how have you encountered ableism on or off the field? Right, the field being in physical activity settings, right, sport or running club or something along those lines. Right, link it to sport. B is a drop down. It'll ask you, were you aware of it? Right, so were you aware that something that maybe you didn't know what ableism was, but you knew something bad was happening? So, but you didn't recognize it, or maybe you didn't, but you recognize it now. Right? And just a sentence, how might you in the future work to address ableism? Yes, sir.
Does it have to be disability or?
Yes, yeah, we'll focus on disability. Yeah. And also there should be, I think the second question is tell me what semester you're in. Obviously we all know we're in spring 2023, okay? All right, take a minute or so and set. Just a sentence or so. You don't have to be overly verbose. Trick is catching you all before you open another app. Anybody need another 30 seconds? Well, they're finishing up. How many of you?
I'm done.
You're done. Well, I don't want to answer this. You know. Anybody out there want to share a potential experience that you may or may not have had? That you may have had? Yes.
When I was in high school, and elementary school, also learned to have a school that you could have people with disabilities, both physically, mentally, and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it was one of those schools that was progressing forward and included them almost every way, shape, or form, as much as they could with the resources they had.
Yeah.
And what also surprised me is that it stayed with that in that school district all the way to high school, where on my high school football team, way back in the 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. Super far back.
Yeah. Even though we were like 6A Division 2, so that we played against like big schools in Texas, we had some people on our team who had people that were like autistic, or had
Okay, that's a good side of it. That's a good screen. Yeah, that's good to hear.
That side is outside of that, I didn't really see much inclusion.
Yeah.
Because he was like our teammate, he was like our brother.
Mm-hmm.
We still treated him like everyone else. And outside,
Very
you know
different.
how many people treated him like how good we treat them. It really hit home when like senior year comes around. His mom really comes to the team and thanks that person for just proving him in and treating him like he's doing.
Yeah, being a good person, right? Yes, being a human. Yeah, sure.
I hung out with him before outside, and the team will go out to eat. He comes along.
Mm-hmm.
You see how other people might look at him, like, why is he here? Why is he so obnoxious? Why is he loud?
Mm-hmm.
We just like, it doesn't matter.
That's him, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's what we learn to accept and accommodate. Right? It sounds like you were in a situation at school that afforded the opportunities for that, but it became very evident when you went outside of those spaces. And some of you may have those experiences too. For the sake of time, we're going to move on to the last two things that we're going to finish up on. But hopefully, if you don't have, or you didn't have a story to say that you experienced, you did?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to save it for a little later, okay? If you don't, potentially after today, you might be a little bit more aware of how ableism exists within a broader society. Oh, I did that already. Okay. I'm going to finish up on these two slides. First, why does language matter? Right? And when we talk about disability, how do we do it? I think for many of you, that may be the harder part to get started to actually engage in this topic, is you don't want to talk about disabled folks in the wrong way. Now, language around disability shifts, and it shifted a lot, particularly over the last few years. When we look at language from a humanist perspective, we would suggest that we should use person-first language, right? A person with, right? A person with a disability, a person with autism, so on. Post-humanism, which, as it suggests, came after humanism, suggests that labels are fluid, right? That a label is what you most identify with. And so there are disabled activists that prefer identity-first language, meaning I am a disabled person, right? These are particularly poignant around two communities, one being the deaf community, right? There are individuals who are deaf, little d deaf, but they do not consider themselves a part of the deaf community. Deaf people have existed across time, and they have developed languages, poetry, music, ways of communication, society that exists around the experience of being deaf. Right? Autism is another one that there is a growing group, particularly of autistic adults, who prefer to be called an autistic person. Because for them, person-first language, such as individual with, suggests that whatever you put after the with is so bad that it has to be separated with the with, right? That for myself, right? I am a person with depression, right? Depression is a bad thing, right? Sometimes I do want to separate it, but it also causes me to look at the world in a different way than somebody who doesn't have depression. Right? Autism even more so. Right? So somebody cannot separate themselves. You take away their autism, you take away their personhood, right? Who they actually are. Potentially a part of their identity. That isn't to suggest, however, though, that all autistic people, or all deaf people, or all disabled people prefer identity-first language. When in doubt, use the language that the person themselves is using, right? Whatever you do, don't correct them on their choice of languages, right? Just as you hope somebody wouldn't try to correct you on your choice of language, on how you choose to identify. And I will leave you with this last slide. I know I'm right at time. Okay? We often see these words and other things ancillary to this when we talk about disability. That, again, is meant to distance ourselves from disability because we look at it as a bad thing, right? So when somebody says they have special needs, all they're really saying is they are disabled and they have needs like anybody else has needs. But when we say they're special, that means they're extra. I maybe don't have to do them, right? And you may also see language, and this is the last slide, I swear, that looks like this. He suffers from, they're afflicted with, or they're a victim of, right? Add in any type of disability or category. But I push you to recognize how that language, and even other languages that we use, things like crazy or insane, how those things are rooted in disability culture, and they continue to perpetuate stigma. It's hard to rid yourself of saying, man, that's crazy. But as we go through this semester, recognize how those little things can make a really big difference. Right? We'll pick up from here next week. See y'all next Tuesday.